Chapter 21. A little knowledge, is it dangerous?
Zentran sat behind a console in Alpha 1 and looked at the screen connected to the Council network. The primary unit lay in a bunker below the building. Although the console wasn't that different to those on his ship, the data and the way it was presented were worlds apart. Unfamiliarity brought uneasiness, and he felt the need for caution. He'd bypassed the reception area so as not to endanger Fora. She'd informed him that the security guards were human, so he'd only needed to influence them to let him through. Not being connected to the microwave system the way lookalikes were alleviated the danger of his mental persuasion being detected. Fora was at her desk monitoring the communication lines with attentiveness many orders of magnitude greater than the high standard that was her norm. Working quickly helped calm her nerves. Zack waited with Venru aboard Nebulon space cruiser in the Alpha 6 building's docking bay. The hyperdrives were turning slowly, ready to leave at a moment's notice. Thoughts of Fora came to Zentran as he adhered to the preliminary functions of gaining access to the system. He'd decided that she shouldn't accompany them on their Delta 5 trip. Instead, she'd stay and continue her usual routine. Her absence would be conspicuous. Working her required shifts at the Council headquarters would be safer. Her help with data required to enter the computer system, together with what he'd obtained from the memory crystal, was proving its worth. How far he'd be able to progress remained to be seen. The initial gateway procedures were negotiated without trouble. Every successful navigation he made through the system relieved his tension. Arriving at the entry point to the data concerning lookalikes, he paused. Here, he could enter the lookalike code that Zack had uncovered. He entered it. DEL 374TA. Data appeared, confirming access had been established. Zentran selected an option. History. The screen went blank. Then what he dreaded. Several blocks appeared, requiring an access code. None of the information he'd obtained from the memory crystal had gone this far. He was flying blind. If the system didn't get the correct code in a fairly short space of time, all hell would break loose. Fora had confirmed, as in Zack's unsuccessful attempt, the system would alert, bringing an army of lookalikes to apprehend him. Having no idea what the code could be, he prepared to enter letters at random and made provision for what would undoubtedly follow. There was no time for anything else. Hopefully, he could prevent an alert mentally. Otherwise, a fast retreat would be necessary. He readied himself. A presence behind startled him. There was no need to turn around, as there was nothing to see. What he sensed was without a body. Nakas. A more welcome relief he couldn't imagine. The free being had ventured into Zentran's domain to lend assistance. Instinctively, Zentran entered characters into the blocks and waited apprehensively. He had no idea what he typed or why, although it didn't seem he'd done so randomly. The uncanny feeling that Nakas was a part of him came once more to his awareness. That part which was Nakas had instructed his fingers. Time stood still for a while. No alert sounded. As he breathed, slowly anticipating it, somehow Nakas had guided him through. Information filled the screen, with categories relating to specifications, circuitry, and components. Zentran skimmed through, looking for anything to satisfy his longing to understand what it was that gave lookalikes some form of mental power. Further, what was the significance of the code DEL 374TA? What did the lookalike that carried that code have to do with anything? He found it all right. It was all there in astonishing detail. Initial disbelief compelled him to re-examine the information. The first time through had stunned him. There was no doubt that he'd understood the content correctly. By the time he'd finished his second run through, the data had him reeling. A footnote at the bottom of the last page caught his eye. Amongst a series of initials crediting contributing scientists, he saw FVF. If what he'd understood from the data wasn't horrific enough, the fact that Fora, or Felissa Volmer Framson, as she was known in that earlier lifetime, had been part of the design team was beyond even that. Nakas laid a comforting unseen hand on his shoulder. It was a symbolic gesture. He'd known. Zentran wondered why Nakas hadn't informed him earlier. Was it really necessary to learn things on his own? He'd started on that route, and this time Nakas had helped him. But now he was alone, with his mind in turmoil. Nakas had gone. Zentran got up, forgetting to exit the system. Suddenly something else came to him. He knew what his mission orders were. Why his commanding officer, as Felissa Volmer Framson, had sent a desperate message through the spiritual realm. A message to him, an electric swordsman missionaire who had never failed. A message to undo this abomination. He sat down again, closed the system, and wandered into the corridor in a daze. Security guards were handled as on the way in. Only now, he was in much the same bewildered condition as those around him. No pretense was required. As he made his way out of Alpha 1, he sent Fora an estranged farewell. It seemed far too final, as a confused notion arose that he'd never see her again. He hesitated, almost changing his mind. Across the skywalk to Alpha 6, he blended in perfectly. Distraught and confused, there was no sense of urgency in making his way to the docking bay, where Zack and Venru waited for him so intently. Zack brought the drives up to power as he saw Zentran approaching. He'd expected a mental message, and Zentran rushing towards them, possibly pursued by an army of lookalikes. Certainly not the dejected sight he now witnessed. Zentran boarded the craft, looking like Zack had never seen him before.
Did everything go okay?
Zentran gave a nod and a shrug, but offered nothing further in response. Zack couldn't pick up anything mentally. He guided the space cruiser out of the docking bay area. As he took it up through the atmosphere, he asked mentally.
What happened?
There was still no data available to Zack. Zentran looked at him earnestly.
Everything went fine, but I need to sort a few things out. Now is not the time to talk about it. Sorry, Zack.
Zack turned to Venru. She was just as concerned. Zentran wanted to say something to allay Venru's apprehension, but couldn't find anything appropriate, so he didn't. There seemed to be nothing else to do but shrug.
Is Fora okay?
Asked Zack, thinking it might be that.
Yes, she's fine.
Zentran looked past Zack at Venru and felt as if a cold draft passed. He shivered. The farewell to Fora had been much too final. The trip to Delta 5 was uneventful. Zentran missed Fora in a way he hadn't experienced, even on his long haul. Perhaps he shouldn't have left her behind. Perhaps they should go back for her. Through the confusion, he knew that even if she'd been there, he wouldn't have been able to talk to her either. He looked ill and endured the time silently on his bunk. Zack wondered what in all creation could be wrong with his friend, but realized he needed solitude. Zentran lay with his face to the wall. He felt the shell on his chest and stroked it. Slowly, he moved out of his body. Viewing his body as it lay on the bunk, it seemed so worthless. Bodies were disposable. He saw Zack and Venru from his exterior position. Zack sat at the controls with Venru next to him. Her head rested on his shoulder. She ran her fingers through his hair, while her other hand's fingers tapped a slow rhythm on the control panel. She sang softly to the tempo, and sometimes Zack joined in. The data acquired from the council's computer felt like the load of a building. He'd always shared everything with Zack, but this he knew he would have to carry alone, at least until he'd come to grips with it. Transferring the information with his present anguish would cause the recipient even more distress. He'd spent most of his life alone, but he'd never felt lonely before. His attention drifted back to Fora, and he felt the shell again. The wonder of her presence and the marvel of her form filled his mind.
Where is she? And what is she doing now?
He wondered.
How will I ever tell her? Or will I have to keep her part a secret always?
He located Fora in her apartment back on Delta 4B. Her chest moved gently to slow rhythmic breathing, raising and lowering her breasts as he watched her sleep. The sight brought some relief. Stirring, her large eyes flickered open.
Zen,
She whispered as she felt his presence. She cast her eyes around the room, searching for a visual trace that wasn't there. They merged with the infinite nothingness they'd experienced before. Zentran felt himself almost break through to another dimension, perhaps the one where Nakas resided. There was no mistaking his troubled mind.
What's the matter, Zen?
Nothing that won't pass. Being with you helps.
But what is it, Zen?
I don't want to burden you with it. I'll let you know when I've dealt with it.
Don't you forget now?
Fora made light of it. She knew his plight had something to do with what he'd learned from the council computer. He'd let her know when he was ready. Caressing his being, if one could call it that, she eased his disquiet. Even in their most intimate moments since childhood, she'd held back from being overly forthcoming regarding commitment. Now, though, she confirmed the promise they'd made in the overhead sun zone. Then there was nothing. mental activity seemed to stop. Even the molecules in the air seemed to stop moving. As perception gradually crept back, Fora noticed it was raining outside, and there was a chill in the air. She drew the sleep covering to her and bent her knees, pulling her feet nearer the warm part of the sleeping unit. A naughty, girlish smile lit her face as she sensed he was still there. Zentran's senses returned to a degree. His mental distress seemed of less consequence now. Re-examining what he'd found out confirmed that it was real. What he'd uncovered was definitely not an illusion. He made a bold decision.
Let's marry when I get back.
Fora considered the implications.
It's daring, but yes, let's do it.
Nothing else was of any consequence at that moment. Galaxies filled with planets, even universes, whether they be physical or spiritual, didn't matter. Only the mental concept Fora had sent him, imprinted in his mind,
Yes, let's do it.
seemed of complete importance. Serenity visited the realm where he and Fora resided. There was more to the union than the physical. The material universe may just as well have not existed at all. Zentran turned over on his bunk. His smile was a sharp contrast to his earlier disposition. Zack turned around in the pilot seat and smiled back.
Welcome back, friend.
Thanks, Zack. We can beat them. And we will.
Zentran climbed off his bunk, moved over to Zack, and sat down next to him. Nothing more was said as he took over the controls. Zack noted the change with relief. He noted also raw energy surrounding Zentran's body, casting a glow around him like a halo.